Hi, I'm Parker Miley,
I'm Tim Benjamin.
and this is the Rage Podcast, where today we are going to discuss the area, situation, and possibly relationship you are in. All right? Tim has no clue what we're talking about.
Wow.
Tim has no clue what we're talking about, and that's
Which is
how
typical
I like it.
for this episode, yes.
But I like this because Tim does a sermon and I do a sermon, and so I can make the topics kind of what I missed in my sermon, like kind of how we did last week, but you don't know that because you didn't watch Walnut Grove services, at least none of you that I think watched this. So, this week, we're going to look at Jacob. Okay. Jacob, and Tim will be familiar with the story because if you didn't know, Tim knows all the Bible. Jacob and Laban, all right? And now, I'm going to lay the premise of the story out for you as best as of my ability. Jacob wanted to marry Laban's daughter, all right? He wanted to marry Rachel, all right? So Laban says, well, and Laban has some pretty big authority, okay? Because he's a goat farmer.
Apparently, yes.
And because he's a goat farmer, he has a very attractive daughter that all these young men want. And so he is like, oh my gosh, well, I'm living high on the hog because, again, goat farmers also...
No, high on the goat.
High on the goat, yeah.
High on the goat, yeah.
Goat farmers also, everyone needs something to sacrifice. Laban was making money because he was selling goats for everyone to sacrifice and all these things. So Laban was a pretty important figure in the culture back then. And Jacob was viewed kind of as a lowlife by Laban. And so Laban said, you can have my daughter Rachel if you work for 7 years. Jacob says, okay, I'll work for 7 years. Now this is 7 years no pay because the pay is Rachel, all right? That's how this works. Jacob was given most likely a place to live and probably some form of food, but that's it. So Jacob worked 7 years to get Rachel. However, Laban, being a nasty old man, tricks Jacob, and the day that they were supposed to get married says, I'm not going to give you, pretty much he says, I'm not going to give you my hot daughter, I'm going to give you my ugly daughter Leah. Okay, so then Jacob's like, I don't want Leah, but thanks. So Jacob marries Leah anyways. Poor Leah in this situation.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Jacob says, oh, well, I still want Rachel. And then Laban says, well, okay, work another 7 years, and then I'll give you Rachel. So now Jacob's going to work 14 years, and he finally gets Rachel. And then at the end of this season of working those 14 years, and he gets now his 2 wives that are the daughters of Laban, he says, hey, I've worked 14 years, and I have nothing except 2 wives, and now I'm going to have to support a family. So Jacob asked Laban, hey, can you give me some of your goats? And Laban says, well, yeah, but you're going to have to work 7 years to get some of my goats.
See a pattern developing here?
All right.
Yeah.
So in total, Jacob works 21 years to get 2 wives and a couple goats.
He gets an ugly wife, a hot wife, and goats. So you can debate on which one he
So know what you're working for, okay? I think it's a great payment, all right? And then Laban, but during that 7 years that Jacob was working for the goats, Laban said, here's how he was paid, all right? Laban had 2 kinds of goats. He had spotted goats and he had striped goats, all right? And Laban would say, I'm going to give you all the spotted goats. That's your wage. Once the 7 years are up, you're going to get all the spotted and I'm going to keep the stripes. But God, and if you don't know anything about Jacob, Jacob is a part of the holy patriarch family of God's nation at that time, of Israel, okay? So Jacob was pretty favored by God. So God would actually make all of the goats either have stripes or spots, depending upon which one Laban told Jacob was his wage, okay? So Laban's obviously pretty ticked because God's like stealing all of his goats to give them to Jacob. And so Laban gets upset, starts treating Jacob and his 2 daughters that are Jacob's wives poorly, and God comes to Jacob in a dream and says, hey, get out of this place. Leave. Jacob, being a good husband, says, hey, to his wives, God told me to leave, and the wives were like, absolutely, let's get the heck out of here because we hate our dad. And so they eventually make the journey to leave, and the story gets a little bit tricky after that, but that's not really what we're going to talk about today. But that was that story, and I think the key takeaway is sometimes God calls you to leave. And leaving's not easy.
No, it's not.
Not at all. Like, here's the analogy. We are all like trees, okay? And hear me out.
You use an analogy about leaving and you're using trees?
Yep.
All right, let's do this.
We are all like trees.
All right.
Where we are at, we have a lot of roots. I have a lot of roots in my community of St. Mary's. I have a lot of roots here at Wayne Street. I have a lot of roots growing out at Walnut Grove right now. They're, I'm planting roots out there now and all those things, and the roots are going to get deep. And once your roots get so deep, it's hard to move a tree, right? If you're going to pick up and just move a tree, you probably would do it when it's a young little sapling rather than a big, sturdy, deep-rooted tree, right? So, and again, Tim's in the same situation. You can look from everything that he does. He has quite a few roots here in St. Mary's as well, but somehow he's capable of just being able to pick up and leave at any moment's notice.
I've done it a number of times.
Yeah. But it's never easy, I'm assuming. Never easy. All right, so we all have roots in whatever it is, whether it be our family, our town, the home we live in. There's all these different roots, okay? And sometimes, so again, it's hard to just pick up a tree that has a lot of roots and move it, even if the tree's roots are not in the best soil. And here's what I mean by that. The tree that has roots planted in the sandy, dry soil over here still has roots there. Even though it's not getting all the nutrients it needs, even though it's not getting everything that could be offered to it in, say, by the tree that's planted by the water, okay? But it still stays there. Why? Because it's got its roots there. God tried to bless Jacob by having him, by giving him these goats. However, Laban kept interfering. Laban was the dry, sandy soil that was not good for the tree. And God said, hey, Jacob, if you leave this place, you can have this massive blessing. You can go back to the land I promised your grandfather. You can have all the goats you need in the world and all these things, and Laban can't keep stealing them from you. Because Laban kept stealing Jacob's blessing. Because he was still under Jacob's authority, because he lived on not Jacob's authority. Jacob was still under Laban's authority because he lived on Laban's farm and he was his farm hand and all those things and so Jacob was like the tree that was in the nasty, dry, nutrient-less soil, okay? And God said, hey, Jacob, I gave you a brain. Use it. Leave this place. Get out of here. And again, Jacob's been here for 21 years. And it's also the home that his wives grew up on and all these things. I mean, he was pretty settled, I think, for 21 years. You'd have a lot of roots in that situation.
Kids are growing up there and everything, sure.
Yeah. So God's saying, hey, this isn't the place for you. It's time to leave.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing about that is as we listen to the story, and we've all read it before, and Parker did a good rundown of it, we think, gosh, why would he not want to just get the heck out of there, Laban's treating him really bad, but it's easy for us standing, a couple thousand miles away and a couple thousand years away to look at that and say, what a terrible situation. But if you're in the middle of that, the concept to just pick up and go that's a little tougher. And any of you who have ever done a big move, and I know Parker's just recently done one where he's now out at Walnut Grove coming from Wayne Street, those moves, it is hard because it comes back to the familiar versus the unfamiliar. Sometimes we'll take the familiar even if it's bad because it's better than what we don't know, and that's unfamiliar. And but Jacob made an attempt. Now we can go back and look at how well that went, but he made an attempt to go, and I don't know. I guess he was somewhat blessed, anyways, in the whole process. But sometimes the danger is we say. We hear God calling to a new situation or to step out of our comfort zone, and we say, nah, this may not be the best here, but at least I understand it. At least I'm familiar with it. At least I know how to predict what's going to happen and stuff, and I'll take that over the unknown. And, man, there's a lot of parallels you can draw to today that causes those problems, People, especially young men who spend a lot of time playing video games and goofing off and things instead of trying to go out and find a wife and start a family and have a situation where they're going to be able to grow into something respectable and contributing to society. It's because they never step out of the comfort zone of the couch. So, yeah, that's just one example. There's a lot of them out there. One of the things that I've noticed over the past years, and with all due respect to all teenagers that are on this podcast with me, I've seen a lot of young people anymore, how different they are than when I was a young person. Before Parker was born. I can remember back in those days when we would do like youth group games and stuff or games at school or whatever. Man, it was all in. We'd go out to recess and you'd come in with your shirt torn and your grass stains and maybe both your shoes if you were lucky, because we would go out there, man, and it was all go. And I watch kids now, we'll try to organize a youth group game, half the kids won't even play. It's just a very different mindset than what we grew up with. And I think that timidness, I think, is what it is. That's the word I use. Being timid, I think it prevents people from seeing opportunities. Because Jacob could have been very comfortable where he was, but he would not have been prosperous. So he took the option between comfortable and prosperous, and he chose prosperous, even though it was not comfortable. And I think too often we'll go for those creature comforts over making an actual contribution.
And it's not just like, in the same as like, so the example we used with Jacob was area, but it can
his
be
was land.
It can be
lots of
it can
things,
be situation. It can be a relationship you're in, or and all the job you do, and all those things. Like sometimes there's a time where you just gotta leave. You're not getting
when you know the calling ends.
Yeah.
One of the I don't want to get away from your biblical analogy, but one of the best stories that I read about this was at the end of King David's life, when he says, gosh, here I am, and God's living in a tent. Maybe I should build a temple. And God said, nope, your son's going to do that. For David was the warrior, where Solomon, his son, was going to be the builder. And David's calling essentially ended. I don't mean that in a negative way. He just fulfilled his purpose.
Yeah.
And he was only able to do that, and he came to a point where that was it. Yes, you have the resources that you could build a magnificent temple, but that's not your role. It's time to pass that on to somebody else.
So I think the question really becomes, are you where you need to be? Not just area-wise.
Not want to be.
Yeah, not want to be,
yeah,
but need to be.
Yeah.
And I think what you'll find when you are where you need to be is some form of undescribable fulfillment and joy. Not all the time.
Not comfort.
Again, not comfort.
Yeah.
And not always happiness, right? I said joy. Joy doesn't just go in and out. Happiness does, but you'll find a joy that is pretty solid, right? Because that's the difference between kind of joy and happiness. Like for me, I absolutely love everything I do, ministry wise, because I feel like that's what I've been called to do, and I get that sense of fulfillment. And I talk to people, and they're like, "That sounds absolutely miserable." And they were like, I love it. Like, even I had a board meeting last night, and I love just being in kind of that board meeting. Just because
you really are called for this job.
It was just because like we were doing the work of the church, even though it's not always fun, and even though it can be pretty boring and all these things, you were still doing that work of the church, and that's just the calling on my life. Not saying that everyone, everyone's got to be either on the
everybody's got to love board meetings, because that's not going to happen.
Exactly, but you see, like this is just me carrying it out, and so now I'm trying to, you go and saying, well, where is the next spot that God wants me to go in this path? Because just because I enjoy ministry doesn't mean all ministry is the same. If you understand what I'm trying to say there. Like the role of pastoring is different from someone who works at like WTGN or Agape or any of those ministry groups.
And the danger you run into with this is about life. Following the Lord implies a journey always, and you can't ever say, "Well, I've arrived and I'm done." God may release you from a calling, like I mentioned with David, but in Jacob's sense, that clearly had not happened. Achieving the 2 wives and all the goats and all the things, he hadn't arrived yet, and he still had work to do. And if you go read the story of the Bible, you'll know he had a lot of work to do. But if we just decide at some point, well, I've accomplished what God had me out to do, and I don't need to do anything else, and you're not going to make any moves, and you decide I'm going to allow my roots to be in this soil, even if it's not the final soil God wants me to be in, you're cheating yourself. You're cheating yourself out of what could be. And that's not to say you need to go run after every crazy idea that comes into your head, but it is to say always be asking the question of, is there more out there? Again, you might not have to uproot yourself and go to a whole new situation. Maybe you will, but you don't necessarily have to do that. But as soon as you decide it's this far and no farther, you stop growing, and perhaps even that will compromise your witness, because God's his goal for you may be over there, and if you never get over there, what's that going to mean? And you're going to not experience that sense of fulfillment that Parker was talking about a second ago, that joyful experience of God, you can't experience that when you're not inside of His will. If His will's over there and you're over here, you missed the mark, which is the definition of the word sin.
And I think a hard part of this is, Tim's a pastor, and he's been a pastor for a long time, and I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor for a month, but like everyone thinks that when we say call and fulfilling that purpose, I think it's hard to relate, because kind of this call that me and Tim at least have experienced, and Tim has many more years on it than I have, is different from kind of everything else. It's a bit of a different call, right?
It is, but not as different as people make it out to be.
Yeah, but that's not to say that even depending on what you work.
The danger is if you decide it looks like us and nothing else. Yeah. That's the danger.
Yeah.
For us, this is what it looks like. It's not supposed to look like this for you, but it does look like something, and whatever that is, and it could be as simple as being a great, a parent to your family, or a great member of your family, or a great member of your community. It may be that. Or it may require some stepping out of the comfort zone and being a part of a mission trip or a mission experience or a project at church, or any of dozens and dozens of different things. It can manifest itself. But if you say that's outside of where I'm willing to go, then God may say, "Well, doggone, I wish you'd have done that, because who knows what was over there."
Yeah, and I think that's kind of when I was reading that passage and kind of preparing for it, I was like, sometimes God calls you to leave.
Yeah. Well, let's close the analogy here. Parker was using the roots, I think, very well. So what are those roots? Are those roots? Are they there to give you the nourishment? And if so, they need to be in the most nourishing soil, or are they there just to be a tether to make sure that you don't get too far from where you really want to be? And that can be a very bad thing, because if they're going to tether you to something that's toxic and not good for you, and will never give you enough leeway to get over there to where God may be calling you, maybe time to trim some of them off, really. Yeah. Because if they're a hindrance rather than a nourishment, then they're clearly, as roots, they're not serving their purpose. So friends, that's what we want you to consider here this week with the Raised Podcast is...
evaluate your situations.
Yeah. Are you where you should be?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there hasn't been some bends and turns in the road that you didn't see coming, because that's true of every human being ever. But it also means that always looking toward tomorrow and where God may be leading, and willing to follow where that goes. Because if you're not going to follow, then you're outside of the circle, and that's not a fulfilling place to be. Take it from anyone who's ever been there. So. All right, well, thank you for following to be here on this podcast with us, and we hope all of you have a great day, and the Lord says follow, you're going to have to move.
Yep.